My husband Jerome was making breakfast when a message came through on his tablet. "Thinking of you, boss." I stared at those 3 words for what felt like forever. Then I grabbed the device and typed back fast. "Stop by today. My husband won't be around." 20 minutes went by. The knock on our front door made Jerome freeze like a statue. All the color left his face in 1 second. Our small kitchen smelled like fresh pancakes and maple syrup. It was Saturday morning in our little house on Riverside Avenue. Everything seemed so normal and happy. At least that's what I thought my life was like until right now. Jerome stood by the griddle flipping pancakes. He wore the red apron our kids gave him last Father's Day. He was humming a tune from the radio. From where I sat, Jerome looked like the perfect dad and husband. A man who worked hard at his office job but still made weekend breakfast for his family. He always said making money was important, but making memories with your wife matters more. I was sitting at our kitchen table looking at a cookbook. But my mind wasn't on recipes. The warm morning sun came through our window and lit up the wooden table where Jerome's tablet sat quietly. Its dark screen was like a secret box hiding things I never knew about. Jerome turned around and smiled at me. The little wrinkles by his eyes made him look handsome and kind. He asked me to try a piece of pancake to see if it needed more vanilla. Then he went back to pouring batter on the hot griddle. That's when it happened. The tablet screen lit up without making any sound. A blue light flashed showing a new message. My eyes jumped to it right away. The words on the screen were short but they felt like a punch to my stomach. The sender's name was Tasha Reynolds, office assistant. The message said, "Thinking of you, boss." Just 3 simple words but they changed everything. My heart stopped hurting right then. That pain had already died last Tuesday when I found the credit card bill hidden in his gym bag. All I felt now was cold anger and a plan forming in my head. I knew who Tasha was. She started working in Jerome's department about 4 months ago. Jerome mentioned her once at dinner, saying she was smart and helpful and always stayed late to finish projects. I never thought her helpfulness meant helping herself to my husband. I took a long breath trying to calm my racing heart. I'm a 31-year-old woman who built a small business from nothing. I don't scream or throw things when I'm mad. If I made a big scene right now, Jerome would just say it was a harmless message from a confused young woman. I needed more than that. I needed proof they couldn't lie about. Jerome kept chopping strawberries for the pancakes. The sound of his knife on the cutting board was loud in my ears. Without making noise, I picked up the tablet. The password was our daughter's birthday. How twisted is that? He used our child's special day to hide his dirty secrets. I typed the 4 numbers I knew by heart. The screen opened showing the messaging app with that unread note sitting at the top. I didn't open it to read more. My cold fingers moved fast over the screen typing my reply. "Stop by today. My husband won't be around." I hit send. I saw the little check mark appear showing the message went through. A tiny smile came to my face. I took a quick picture of the conversation with my phone and sent it to myself. Then I erased any trace from Jerome's tablet. I wanted him completely surprised when everything exploded. I put the tablet back in the exact same spot at the same angle. My hands shook a little. Not from being scared but from the rage burning inside me. I looked at Jerome's back as he cooked. He was still the same man with the same caring look on his face. But now when I looked at him, all I saw was a fake performance. He was pretending to be the perfect husband while his mind was probably thinking about that young woman at his office. If he wanted to act in this play so badly, I would make sure to write the final terrible scene myself. I fixed my hair and made my face look calm again. The storm inside me stayed hidden behind my normal smile. This was going to be a very long morning. Jerome poured more batter, making perfect round pancakes. He put them on a big white plate and brought it to our table. The sweet smell of vanilla and butter filled our dining room. He used a napkin to wipe a tiny drip of syrup from the plate's edge. Yesterday that breakfast would have made me kiss him and say thank you. Today looking at those pancakes felt like looking at poison covered in sugar. He served me a plate with 3 pancakes stacked high. He picked the best strawberries and put them on top with extra whipped cream. In his warm, deep voice he said, "Eat while it's hot, sweetheart. I made them extra fluffy just how you like them." He even bragged about waking up early to make fresh batter instead of using the mix from a box. I took the plate from my husband and tried hard not to let my hands shake. I cut a piece of pancake with my fork and put it in my mouth. It was incredibly soft and the syrup was perfectly sweet. But as I swallowed, I tasted something bitter and wrong, like I was eating cardboard. I had to drink a big gulp of orange juice to stop myself from feeling sick. I looked at the man sitting across from me. Jerome ate happily, offering me more fruit now and then. He told me funny stories about his coworker Mike, who always burns the office coffee. He talked about a new project at work and how his boss praised him. He mentioned plans to maybe get promoted by summer. But he never once said Tasha's name or mentioned that new office assistant. I wondered how someone could live two different lives so easily. How could he get a message saying thinking of you from another woman and then minutes later act like the loving husband who adores his wife? Maybe during our 8 years of marriage he'd practiced this fake acting so many times that even I couldn't tell what was real anymore. I remembered when we first got married. We lived in a tiny apartment with old furniture from yard sales. Jerome held my hand and promised he'd work hard so we could buy a real house someday, a place where we could raise our kids. And he kept that promise. This little house with its nice backyard was proof of our hard work together. But it seems like once we got comfortable, his heart started wanting more. The faithful wife who shared ramen noodles with him in hard times didn't seem exciting anymore compared to the new attractive women at his office. Pretending I was full, I put down my fork. I said my stomach hurt a little and I wasn't very hungry. Jerome immediately looked worried. He got up, walked over to me, and put his hand on my shoulder asking if I was okay. His hand felt warm, but when it touched me, I felt cold all the way through my body. I turned my head slightly to move away from his fake concern. I made an excuse about getting some water. I looked at the clock on our wall. The little hand pointed to 10 and the big hand pointed to 3. Time was moving so slowly it felt like torture. From her apartment or wherever she lived, it would probably take about 30 or 40 minutes to drive here. I wasn't going to waste this perfect chance. My husband won't be around. Those words were like magic bait she couldn't resist. When I came back to the table, Jerome was cleaning up the dishes. He told me to go sit on the couch and rest, that he would handle the cleanup. Seeing my husband roll up his sleeves to wash dishes used to make me feel so lucky. Now it just looked like another scene in his disgusting theater performance. I sat on our gray couch and picked up the remote control, but I didn't turn on the TV. My eyes stayed fixed on our front door and my ears listened for any sound from outside. A war was happening in my head. Part of me hoped she wouldn't come, that this was all a bad dream and I could keep pretending everything was fine. But the other part of me, the colder and angrier side, wanted that doorbell to ring as fast as possible. I wanted this pain to come out into the light where everyone could see it, because a wound only heals after you clean it out, even if it leaves a scar forever. Every minute felt like an hour. The sound of water running in the kitchen stopped. Jerome came out drying his hands on a dish towel. He asked if I wanted some grapes for a snack. I shook my head and gave a small smile. It was probably a fake crooked smile, but Jerome didn't notice anything. He was too confident in his own perfect act. Or maybe he never cared enough about my feelings to notice when something was wrong. The clock showed exactly 10:30. Our house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Jerome sat on the couch across from me and started looking at news on his tablet with a totally relaxed expression. He probably thought this would be another peaceful Saturday morning with his wife. Or maybe he was already planning what message to send his girlfriend once I went upstairs to take a shower. He had absolutely no idea that the storm was about to crash right through our front door. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of knocking broke the silence. It wasn't super loud, but in our quiet house it sounded like an explosion announcing the start of a battle. Jerome lifted his head looking startled. In his eyes I saw surprise mixed with confusion. He looked at the clock, then at the door and said quietly, Who would come over this early on a Saturday? Then he looked at me like I had the answer. I stayed sitting on the couch, keeping myself completely calm and still. Stay there, I told him. I'll get it. My voice was gentle but firm, not giving him any choice to move. I stood up and walked slowly toward our front door. Every step on our hardwood floor sounded heavy and loud. My heart was pounding hard, not because I was scared but because I felt the strange excitement of a hunter about to catch their prey. I took a deep breath, stood up straight, and put my hand on the doorknob. I turned the lock and pulled open our heavy wooden door. Standing on our front porch was a young woman who looked about 24 years old. She had long dark hair and was wearing a tight pink sweater and jeans. In her hands she held a small white bakery box. The second she saw me, the flirty smile on her face disappeared completely. Her eyes went huge like a scared deer and her face that had been pink turned white as paper. She stood frozen and her hands holding the bakery box started shaking so much I thought she'd drop it. She obviously expected Jerome to answer the door. She probably imagined jumping into his arms and telling him in a sweet voice how much she'd been thinking about him. But the harsh reality that hit her was seeing me, the lady of this house, his legal wife, standing in the doorway with a look sharp as broken glass. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched her terrified expression in silence. My silence made everything feel even more suffocating. Tasha took a step backward, moving her lips like she wanted to speak, but her throat seemed blocked like someone was choking her. She looked past me into our house and then back at my face with the expression of a thief caught stealing. I heard Jerome's footsteps behind me. "Who is it, honey? Why are you taking so long?" he called out. His voice made Tasha panic even more. She looked around desperately like she was searching for an escape route, but I wasn't going to let my prey get away that easily. Smiled. It was probably a smile more scary than crying. And then I spoke. My voice was loud and clear enough for both the person inside and the person outside to hear. Carried cold power in every word. "Hello, Tasha. Did you come here to see my husband?" My question was like throwing ice-cold water on Tasha, and at the same time it shocked Jerome, who was walking up behind me. I saw Tasha shiver like she'd been hit. She realized she'd walked straight into a trap, but there was no going back now. The door was wide open. The show had officially started. Tasha was shrinking like a scared mouse that accidentally wandered into a cat's house. She squeezed that bakery box so hard her knuckles turned white. Stuttering and stumbling over her words, she barely managed to explain why she showed up at our house on a Saturday morning. She said she heard Jerome wasn't feeling well this week, and since she was driving through our neighborhood anyway, she decided to bring him some muffins, hoping he'd feel better soon so he could keep helping her learn at the office. Such a clumsy, obvious lie, it was almost funny. I knew perfectly well Jerome wasn't sick, and our neighborhood was tucked away in a corner where nobody just drives through unless they're coming here on purpose. But I didn't correct her. The fun part of playing cat and mouse is not killing the mouse right away but playing with it until it's exhausted from pure fear. Keeping my faint smile, I stared at her face, which kept changing colors. When I saw Tasha trying to turn around to run away, I said in a voice cold as ice, "If you take one step off this porch, by tomorrow morning everyone at your office and your whole family back in whatever small town you're from will get the pictures and messages between you two. Come inside. Let's have a nice calm talk and I'll let you keep some dignity." Tasha froze in place, trembling all over. She followed me inside our house like a prisoner walking to jail. I told her that since she came all this way, she should see our home, that we decorated it really nicely. I said I wanted to properly introduce her to my husband. I stretched out the word husband on purpose like I was putting a stamp of ownership on the man frozen behind me. Jerome had already walked into our living room. Seeing me come in with Tasha, his face broke down even worse than hers. His eyes bulged out and his mouth hung open, but he couldn't say a single word. The tablet he was holding fell onto the couch cushion. He looked back and forth between Tasha and me like his brain had stopped working. He couldn't understand why Tasha was standing in our living room or why I was acting so calm about it. I led Tasha to the center of our living room and sat her down on the chair facing our big couch where Jerome usually sat to watch football games. Tasha sat on the very edge with her back straight and her knees pressed together. She didn't dare look up from the floor. I turned to Jerome and gestured for him to sit next to me on the couch. Like a robot with no soul, Jerome walked stumbling over to the sofa. Even though our air conditioning was on, drops of sweat formed on his forehead. He sat as far away from me as possible, like I was a bomb about to explode. I started with introductions. Pointing at Tasha, I told Jerome that this was that wonderful office assistant he talked about who came to visit him on a Saturday morning with muffins and everything after finding out her boss was feeling under the weather. Then I introduced Jerome to Tasha, saying he was the most devoted husband in the entire world. A man who never let me down even once. Each compliment I gave was like a needle poking into Jerome's skin. I watched him shrink smaller and smaller. I noticed Tasha shooting desperate looks at Jerome. She wanted him to say something, make an excuse, give her a sign that everything would be okay. But the only thing she got was cowardly silence. Jerome kept his head down, fiddling with the hem of his shirt. He didn't dare say one word. His weakness made my disgust grow even stronger, and probably even Tasha started feeling disappointed. The man who seemed so confident and important at the office had turned into a pathetic, scared little boy who feared his wife. I stood up, saying I should offer our guest something to drink. I asked Tasha what she wanted. Soda, water, or maybe some coffee. With a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said water would be fine. I smiled and walked to our kitchen. The living room became silent as a tomb. I knew the second I left the room those two would exchange panicked looks, but they wouldn't dare speak because they'd be too afraid I might hear them. And that's exactly what I wanted, to let the terror eat away at their minds bit by bit. In the kitchen I made noise on purpose, opening cabinets and moving glasses around so they'd know I was still close by, listening to everything. I opened the cabinet and walked right past our nice glasses we use when company comes over. My hand reached for a stack of cheap paper cups, the kind you get at a gas station. I took one of those flimsy cups and filled it with tap water. My choice wasn't an accident. I wanted to make Tasha feel small through every tiny detail. I wanted her to understand that her place in this house, in our lives, was as cheap and throwaway as that paper cup. Something you use once and toss in the garbage, not worth keeping around. I went back to the living room carrying a small tray. I placed the paper cup of water in front of Tasha. For Jerome and myself, though, I poured fresh coffee into our matching ceramic mugs that we got as wedding gifts. The huge difference between the two types of cups was obvious on our glass coffee table. Tasha looked at the cheap paper cup sitting there clashing with everything else, and her face turned dark red from embarrassment. She understood my message perfectly. It was an insult without words, but it cut deeper and hurt worse than any name I could have called her. I sat down next to Jerome, this time deliberately pressing right up against him. I took his arm and rested my head on his shoulder in an affectionate way. Jerome went stiff as a wooden board. Every muscle in his body was tight with tension. Through his thin shirt I could feel his heart beating like crazy. The cold sweat kept sliding down the sides of his face. I started the conversation with fake polite questions. I asked Tasha how her job was going, if Jerome was a good boss to work for, if he treated all the office staff fairly. While I talked, I rubbed Jerome's arm gently and looked at him with loving eyes every few seconds. Tasha answered in one or two words, not daring to look directly at the tender scene playing out in front of her. In her expression I could see jealousy, bitterness, and fear all mixed together. She was watching how the man she wanted belonged completely and legally to another woman. Whatever sweet promises Jerome whispered to her when they were alone became meaningless compared to this crushing reality. The air in our living room felt so thick it was hard to breathe. Even the soft hum of the air conditioner couldn't make the suffocating atmosphere any better. I felt like I was watching a sad silent movie where every actor tried hard to play their part, except only I knew the script and how it would end. Suddenly I changed the topic and turned to Jerome with fake excitement in my voice. I brought up our plan to visit his parents in Florida next month. I described an imaginary perfect future with enthusiasm. The beach walks, the family dinners, taking the kids to see the ocean. I added that we were thinking about buying a camper van so we could take road trips as a family and maybe visit all the national parks before our kids grew up and moved away. I said we'd already started a savings account just for family vacations and adventures. Every word I spoke was like a knife stabbing into Tasha's heart. She was realizing she was completely left out of Jerome's life. The future plans, the money, the long-term dreams, all of that belonged to us as a married couple. In that picture there was zero room for her. She was just a temporary distraction, a quick thrill for Jerome that meant nothing real. Jerome sat there in awful silence, not confirming or denying anything I said. He looked like he was sitting on hot burning coals, wishing this psychological torture would end as soon as possible. But I wasn't going to let him off that easy. I wanted to burn this horrible morning into both their memories so they'd feel sick every time they remembered it. I turned to Tasha and with a smile asked her a question that seemed innocent but was loaded with meaning. Tasha, you're so young and pretty. I'm sure lots of guys are interested in you. Me though, I'm getting older every day. I have to work hard to keep this man happy so he doesn't leave me. I worry sometimes that someone might try to steal him away when I'm not paying attention. They say nowadays there are women out there who don't care if a man is married, you know what I mean? Tasha jumped like she'd been shocked and her head dropped down fast. She clenched her fists so tight her fingertips went white. She knew exactly who I was talking about. My description of women who don't care if a man is married, though I said it lightly, was sharp as a razor blade cutting away the last piece of her pride. The words hung in the air, making everything even more uncomfortable. Tasha didn't dare answer my question. She mumbled something nobody could understand and avoided my questioning stare. I could see her thin shoulders shaking hard even though she tried to hold still. The confidence and boldness she had when she showed up at my house had vanished completely. All that was left was the image of a guilty person waiting for punishment. But I wasn't finished with them yet. I turned to Jerome and squeezed his arm a little tighter. My fingernails dug slightly into his skin through his shirt, reminding him I was right there and in complete control. I looked at my husband and, changing my voice to a sweet honey tone but keeping my eyes sharp as knives, I asked him about the vacation we took to the mountains last year. I spoke loudly and clearly, making sure Tasha heard every single word. I reminded him that his parents had loved meeting our kids there, that the hiking trails were beautiful, and being up in the cool mountain air felt so refreshing. I emphasized that my parents had offered to help us pay for our next family trip as a gift because they loved seeing their grandchildren so happy. When I mentioned children, I felt Jerome's body go rigid. It was his weakest point. We'd been married for 8 years and had 2 kids already. Our daughter was 6 and our son was 4. I brought up our children on purpose. I knew it was the strongest anchor, the family bond and social respectability that a temporary mistress like Tasha could never give him. I described with fake enthusiasm a future full of school plays and birthday parties and teaching our kids to ride bikes. I said next summer would be perfect to take them camping, and I hoped we could teach our son to fish like Jerome's dad taught him. Then I turned to Tasha and asked if she didn't think that sounded wonderful. At my direct question, Tasha jumped, and the paper cup she was holding slipped from her fingers. It hit the floor, spilling water everywhere. She rushed to pick it up, and with a bright red face she stammered, "It sounds really nice. I'm sure your family will be very happy." How sad and ironic that forced blessing sounded coming from the other woman's lips. I knew inside she was screaming and burning with envy. She came here hoping to find a place for herself in our lives. But the only thing she found was a firm declaration of a future where she didn't exist. The solid family ties, the shared history, the long-term plans, all of it formed an unbreakable wall protecting this marriage. A wall that someone like her with nothing real to offer could never knock down. I continued my attack on a different front. I told Jerome, "Tomorrow I'll transfer money for that summer camp deposit for the kids, so make sure you sign the permission forms tonight." I deliberately emphasized that we shared a bank account and made all big decisions together. It was a declaration showing Tasha that everything Jerome had was connected to me, and that if he left me he'd lose everything. Jerome, sweating like crazy, nodded his head quickly. He desperately wished I would stop talking and stop torturing him with these sweet words about our future that sounded more terrifying than direct threats. He knew perfectly well the warning hiding behind every word I spoke. Don't be stupid and don't trade everything you have for a meaningless fling. The conversation about family and future seemed to suck the last bit of life out of Tasha. She shrank into that chair, hugging her arms around herself like she was freezing cold even though our house was warm. I looked back and forth between the cheap paper cup that had spilled on our floor and the nice ceramic mug in my hand. Feeling cruel satisfaction, I lifted my mug, took a sip, and enjoyed the rich taste of the good coffee. I commented on how delicious it was, smooth and perfectly brewed. I offered Tasha some too, but my eyes stopped on her cheap paper cup with fake sympathy. Tasha, are you okay with just water? Do you want me to make you some instant coffee? Water seems kind of bland, don't you think? My voice sounded kind, like a rich person giving charity to a homeless person, but with an undertone of contempt. Tasha shook her head rapidly with her hands waving. No, I'm fine really. I was thirsty. Water is perfect. I don't want to be any trouble. The word trouble she used seemed ridiculous. Her entire presence here on a Saturday morning was the biggest trouble possible. I set my mug on the table. The solid sound of ceramic against glass echoed in the quiet room. I looked at Jerome. He was still sitting there like a corpse with his eyes glued to his shoes. I decided to involve him more directly in this fun game. I told him to get some cookies for our guest. A good host should be polite. How can you have someone visit and not offer them a snack? Jerome, like he'd been hit with electricity, jumped up and went to our kitchen for the cookie jar. He pulled out some cookies and put them on a plate, but his hands shook so much that 2 cookies fell on the floor. The man who used to make elaborate desserts for our kids' birthdays couldn't even put cookies on a plate properly in front of his girlfriend. His mind had short-circuited. Fear had frozen all his normal abilities. When he put the plate of cookies on our coffee table, I stabbed the biggest chocolate chip cookie with my finger and brought it directly to Jerome's mouth. Open up, sweetheart. Me feed you. Don't use your hands. They're dirty from picking up what you dropped. Jerome hesitated for a second but finally took a bite of the cookie I offered. The scene of a wife feeding her husband affectionately in front of another woman was normal, and yet extremely hurtful to watch. I pushed the plate of cookies toward Tasha. You eat too, Tasha. These are homemade. Very fresh and sweet. Tasha looked at the cookie Jerome had just bitten and then at the plate in front of her like there was a lump stuck in her throat. How could she swallow a bite while watching such a loving display between us? The different treatment wasn't just about the cups but also about attention and care. I was the wife. I had the right to take care of my husband publicly and receive his care in return. She, however, no matter how much Jerome might want her in secret, was an intruder here, a forced witness to our marriage happiness show. I saw Tasha's eyes turning red and watery. She was probably crying inside or maybe regretting the stupidity of coming here to be embarrassed this way. But I felt absolutely no pity for her. My compassion died the instant I saw that message, thinking of you, on the tablet screen. Mercy is a luxury I don't give to people who try to destroy another woman's home and family. Silence took over the living room again, but this time the air smelled like danger. Tasha, perhaps trying to break the tension or recover some dignity in front of Jerome, cleared her throat and asked shyly about his health. Boss, how is your back doing? Is it still hurting? Her voice was quiet but filled with real concern. She even offered to bring him some special pain relief cream her aunt makes that supposedly works miracles. Hearing that, Jerome's face went completely pale. He denied quickly with his hands waving, saying he was totally fine and it wasn't necessary. He glanced sideways at me, looking terrified, knowing his foolish mistress had just made a terrible mistake. She was showing knowledge of her boss's private health problems that went way beyond the limits of a normal work relationship. I let out a laugh, a short, icy sound that made them both flinch. I looked at Tasha with a piercing stare like I could see right through her. Wow, Tasha, you really worry a lot about your boss. Look at that. The wife who lives with him and sleeps next to him every single night still doesn't know all the details about his back pain. But you, an office assistant who's been there just a few months, how do you know so much about his problems? I deliberately stretched out the words lives with him and sleeps next to him to remind Tasha of her place. I gave no break and kept attacking. Does Jerome complain about his aches and pains at the office in front of everyone? Or do you two meet alone so often that you know even the private details about his body? Tasha was left completely speechless. Her face went from red to purple. She stuttered that she had simply noticed him stretching his back at work once, and asked out of normal politeness. What a pitiful excuse. I knew Jerome's back problems were from an old sports injury. To protect his image as a strong, capable man, he rarely showed any weakness at work. He only complained about pain when he was alone with someone he really trusted. I shot Jerome a look that could kill. And you? Why do you go around worrying your employees? Next time if something hurts, tell me your wife. Don't make other people stress about you and offer to bring you medicine. They're going to think your wife doesn't take proper care of you. The other week you told me you were working late on a presentation but your back was killing you. I see now what kind of presentation that really was. At my hint, Jerome dropped his head and said absolutely nothing. He knew exactly what I was referring to. The night he used the late work excuse, he had actually grabbed dinner with Tasha, and probably to get the young woman's sympathy had complained about his sore back. I had just revealed the lie hiding behind a coworker's concern, and exposed the ugly truth of their inappropriate relationship. Her excessive interest was proof she'd crossed professional lines, and I as the wife had every right to question and unmask that fakeness right here in my own house. The clock on our wall showed 11:15. The cat and mouse game had reached its peak. I felt it was time to deliver the final blow that would destroy the intruder's courage completely, and serve as a last warning to my cheating husband. I slowly took my phone out of my pocket and set it on the table. I slid my finger across the screen pretending to check something and then sighed loudly on purpose. The world is so crazy these days. You hear stories all the time about cheating and scandals. My friends tell me young women nowadays are very bold. They send messages to married men like they're texting their boyfriends without any shame at all. I paused and watched their reactions carefully. Tasha sat frozen, but her breathing had gotten faster and louder. Jerome was secretly wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The tension was like a rubber band stretched to its limit about to snap. I made my voice even sharper and continued. I also check Jerome's tablet sometimes to help him with work emails, and lately I've been seeing messages from unknown contacts. A young woman by the look of it. Her name sounds familiar. Must be someone from his office. She sends very friendly messages to Jerome. I glanced sideways at Tasha. Her face had lost every bit of color. Her lips that were bright pink before were now pale and trembling. With a mocking smile I threw the final punch. You know what, Tasha? Just this morning I was sitting right here and my husband was making breakfast and suddenly some girl sends a message to his tablet saying thinking of you. Pretty bold, right? With the wife sitting 10 feet away, someone dares to send a message like that. Was she challenging me? My words landed like thunder on Tasha. She looked at me with eyes huge as dinner plates. Complete terror frozen in her stare. She had figured everything out. The thinking of you message from earlier. The reply saying stop by today, my husband won't be around. It had all been a trap. A perfect trap I set myself, and she like a dumb moth flew straight into the flame. Tasha's hands and feet began shaking out of control. She looked at me like she was seeing a demon. She realized the woman sitting across from her wasn't some clueless trusting housewife, but a master of mind games. I knew everything from the very start but had acted totally normal. Inviting her in, offering her water, serving cookies, and then I slowly peeled off the mask layer by layer until she stood there completely exposed in her own shame. Jerome beside me was also in shock. He turned toward me with a look of pure horror on his face. He never imagined I had read that message and that I was smart enough and cold enough to lure Tasha here and humiliate her this way. My intelligence and ruthlessness sent chills down his spine. He realized he had badly underestimated his wife. I looked Tasha directly in the eyes. My stare was cold and full of disgust. I didn't need to say anything more. My silence was the harshest judgment possible. I had revealed everything, but I hadn't called her terrible names directly. I wanted to see if she had even a tiny bit of self-respect left to leave on her own. It was the last small mercy I would show her before she walked out of this house forever. Tasha couldn't handle it anymore. The invisible pressure coming from me, Jerome's pathetic cowardice, and the brutal truth that had just been uncovered crushed her completely. Every second must have been torture for her, like sitting in a dentist chair getting a tooth pulled without medicine. She frantically grabbed her purse that was sitting beside the chair. In her rush, the purse knocked against the table with a loud thump. She jumped to her feet, but her legs were so wobbly she almost fell over. Without daring to look me in the face, with her head hanging down, she mumbled that she had to go. She made up an excuse that something urgent came up, that her roommate needed her right away, and that she was sorry she couldn't stay longer. Her voice was cracked and broken, on the edge of sobbing. Without waiting for any reply, she headed for our front door, practically running like a criminal fleeing a crime scene. The bakery box with muffins was left behind on our coffee table as evidence of the complete failure of her visit. Jerome made a move to stand up, probably to walk her out or say sorry, but I was quicker. I put my hand firmly on his leg and squeezed hard, signaling him to stay exactly where he was. My eyes hardened, warning him not to do anything stupid right now. Jerome understood my silent message and froze in place. His eyes followed Tasha's back as she disappeared toward our entryway. I got up and followed her slowly to the door. I walked with calm confidence, a total contrast to her panicked stumbling. Tasha was trying to put on her shoes, but her hands shook so violently she kept missing. I leaned against our wall with my arms crossed, just watching her with a mixture of pity and contempt. When she finally managed to get her shoes on and was about to open the door to escape outside, I called out her name. Usha. She stopped dead in her tracks. Startled, she turned around with a scared, begging look on her face. She probably feared I'd scream at her in front of the neighbors or grab her hair or make a huge scene. But I didn't. My dignity wouldn't allow me to act like trash. I walked up close to her and whispered in her ear, quiet enough that only the two of us could hear it. My voice was soft as a gentle breeze but cold as winter ice. Next time you want to see my husband, call his office phone during business hours. If you come wandering around here on weekends, the neighbors might get the wrong idea and think something shady is happening in this nice family neighborhood. And remember this, Tasha, Jerome's wife is always home. Hearing my words, Tasha's face lost its last trace of color. She nodded over and over like a bobblehead doll. She whispered yes ma'am and bolted out our door toward her car parked down the street. She ran so fast she nearly tripped on our front steps. Her figure, small and alone and pathetic, disappeared down our quiet suburban street. I watched her until she got in her little blue car and drove away like her life depended on it. A faint smile appeared on my lips. One down. The young fool had learned her lesson. Now even if someone paid her, she wouldn't dare come near my husband again. But the war wasn't over. The main enemy, the one who caused me the deepest pain, was still sitting in our living room. I turned around and closed our front door firmly. The solid thud of the door shutting echoed through our house. It announced the beginning of the trial for my cheating husband. I took a deep breath, fixed my cold expression on my face, and walked back inside. The wooden door closed, completely separating our home from the outside world. The smile of victory that was on my lips faded away like smoke. I didn't go straight back to the living room. I stood there for a few seconds, gripping the cold metal doorknob. Waves of sickness rose up from my stomach, and I thought I might throw up. I had pulled off a brilliant performance, but the cost was a deep wound bleeding inside my chest. I turned and walked slowly back into our living room. Jerome was still in the exact same position, frozen on our gray couch. His head hung down and his hands were clasped over his knees. He looked pathetic and weak, nothing like the confident, self-assured husband he used to be. But his misery didn't make me feel even slightly sorry for him. Instead, it only increased my disgust and contempt. I walked up to him and picked up his tablet lying on the couch cushion. I looked at him, then at the device, and suddenly, with a sharp, violent motion, I smashed it hard against our glass coffee table. Clack. The loud, harsh sound shattered the awful silence. The tablet screen broke into a spiderweb of cracks spreading across the glass, a perfect symbol of our shattered marriage. In that moment Jerome jumped like he'd been slapped. He looked at me with a face white with terror. I crossed my arms and looked down at him with an icy glare. My voice was sharp and firm, completely empty of emotion. I said, "Explain yourself. The message saying stop by today, my husband won't be around, I sent that. Did you really think I was some idiot who didn't know what was going on?" And just like that, Jerome sat there with his mouth hanging open, staring at me in total disbelief. He didn't expect me to reveal my hand so fast and so forcefully. Maybe he thought I only had vague worries, but he never dreamed I'd been controlling everything from the very beginning. His lips trembled as he tried to form some pathetic excuse. "Honey, it's all a big misunderstanding. She and I are just work friends. Her showing up today was a complete shock to me, I swear. I had no idea she was coming." He tried to play the innocent victim. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. I let out a bitter laugh. "Work friends. A work friend sends you a message at 10 in the morning on Saturday saying she's thinking of you. A work friend knows more about your health problems than your own wife does. A work friend dares to come to your house assuming your wife isn't home." I moved closer to him, looking him straight in the face, and said, slowly marking each word clearly, "Don't treat me like I'm stupid. We've been living together for 8 years. I know you better than you know yourself. That guilty look in your eyes, that jump you did when she knocked on the door, that coward attitude you showed in front of your girlfriend, everything gave you away completely." Jerome lowered his head, not daring to answer back. He knew that faced with such obvious truth, any lie would be useless. His silence was the clearest confession possible. I felt crushing disappointment. The man I had loved and trusted with my whole heart was nothing but a dirty liar, a coward too weak to take responsibility for his own actions. Jerome's silence poured gasoline on the fire of my anger. I didn't need his empty apologies. I wanted him to face the raw, ugly truth he'd tried so desperately to hide. I went to my purse sitting on our bookshelf and pulled out a thick folder of papers I had prepared yesterday afternoon. They were the proofs I'd been secretly collecting for the past 2 weeks since I first started suspecting something was wrong. I threw the papers at his face. The white sheets flew through the air and scattered messily all over the broken tablet and couch. Jerome picked up one paper. His hands were shaking so badly the page rattled. It was our credit card statement from the last 3 months. I had circled and highlighted charges to a jewelry store, a fancy restaurant, and a flower shop with dates that matched days Jerome said he was working late. The amounts weren't enormous, a few $100s each time, but the pattern was clearly suspicious. One charge really stood out, $250 at a boutique clothing store from 2 weeks ago, with a note in Jerome's handwriting that said "for tea." I pointed at the statement and raised my voice. "And how do you explain this money? $250 clothing gift for an office assistant. For my last birthday, a card from the drugstore and takeout Chinese food was good enough for you. Your generosity is truly impressive." Jerome sat speechless with sweat pouring down his face. He didn't expect me to know his spending in such detail. But that wasn't everything. I pulled out screenshots of text messages I had found on his tablet before he started deleting them. Flirty conversations, plans to meet for lunch at restaurants across town, and even sickeningly sweet messages saying he couldn't stop thinking about her. I threw down another photo. It was a restaurant receipt from 3 weeks ago at 9:30 at night. That evening he told me he was attending a training seminar that ran late, but he was actually having dinner with his mistress. And finally I pulled out a photo of a silver earring I found wedged in the passenger seat of his car. I don't wear silver earrings. My ears are sensitive, so I only wear gold. That earring without any doubt belonged to Tasha. Faced with such undeniable proof, Jerome collapsed completely. There was no way left to deny it or make excuses anymore. His mask of being a good husband had been ripped off, revealing his true cheating nature underneath. He let his arms fall limp and he sank deep into the couch with an expression of total despair. And then he started crying. Tears running down a grown man's face. Something I'd only seen maybe twice in our whole marriage. "I'm so sorry. I lost my mind for a while. She confused me and I made a terrible mistake. Please forgive me just this one time." A too late apology and a cowardly excuse trying to shift blame onto someone else. Cheating men always use the same playbook. Got tempted. I couldn't control myself. Seeing him cry made my heart turn to stone. I went to our kitchen. I grabbed the plate of pancakes he had made with such care that morning. They were still sitting on the counter getting cold and hard. Under Jerome's shocked stare, I scraped the entire plate of pancakes into our garbage can. The sweet smell of maple syrup mixed with the sour smell of trash creating a disgusting stench. I turned to Jerome and spoke my final sentence to him. My love for you is like these pancakes. Before they were sweet and precious and something I treasured. But once they get contaminated and ruined, they're nothing but garbage. And I don't eat garbage. My act of throwing away the food was like a bucket of freezing water dumped on Jerome's head. He seemed to wake up from his fantasy world. He realized I wasn't joking around. The determination in my eyes and my actions announced a permanent break that couldn't be undone. Jerome ran toward me, dropped to his knees on our kitchen floor, and wrapped his arms around my legs. He cried uncontrollably, begging me not to leave him, not to divorce him. He swore he would end everything with Tasha immediately, that he would even quit his job if that's what it took, that he would do absolutely anything to fix his horrible mistake. He brought up our kids, our families, our 8 years together, trying desperately to hold me back. I remained stiff as a statue, letting him cry while hugging my legs. My heart was already dead to him. His promises now only made me feel more disgusted. If he had really valued our 8 years of love and partnership, he wouldn't have gotten involved with another woman. If he had really thought about our children, he wouldn't have risked destroying their family. Coldly, I pushed his hands away and stepped backward out of his reach. I looked down at him with pity and said, "Keep whatever small amount of dignity you have left. Don't be pathetic. My decision is final and nothing will change it." I turned around and went straight to our bedroom. Inside my closet was a large suitcase I had packed the night before. I pulled it out and threw in a few more clothes and my important personal items. I didn't take much, just what truly belonged to me. This house, this furniture, everything now seemed stained and dirted by his betrayal. I walked out to the living room, pulling my suitcase behind me. Jerome was still on the floor in the kitchen, crying with his head in his hands. His sobs echoed through our quiet house. I left a folder of papers I had printed yesterday on our coffee table. Inside was documentation of the $5,000 my parents gave us as a wedding gift that we used for our down payment on this house, along with a letter from my father confirming it was a loan, not a gift. This $5,000 is a clear debt that needs to be repaid. Don't even think about not paying it back. When you refinance the house or sell it, the first thing you'll do is return this money, and then we'll split whatever's left. I told Jerome with a voice like ice. Get ready to pay back every single penny. The house is in both our names, but I'm not going to fight you for it. You can keep it and live here with your girlfriend if you want. But my parents' money, that comes back to me first. Jerome looked at the papers and then up at me. His expression was pure hopelessness. He knew he couldn't come up with that much money quickly, especially now that I'd destroyed his reputation. But I didn't care at all. It was the price he had to pay for his betrayal and lies. I wanted him to feel the pain of loss down to his bones, both emotionally and financially. I dragged my suitcase toward our front door. Before leaving, I took one last look around the house. What used to be our happy home had become the graveyard of my love and trust. I opened the door and stepped out into the bright sunny morning. The sound of the door closing behind me echoed one final time, putting an end to 8 years of my life with that unfaithful man. Without looking back, even once, I walked with steady steps toward my car parked in our driveway. A new life was waiting for me. It would be difficult and lonely, but at least it would be honest and peaceful. My car traveled through the streets of our town, heading toward the highway. Sitting in the driver's seat, I watched familiar landmarks pass by. My mind felt empty but strangely lighter than it had in weeks. I didn't cry. The tears seemed to have dried up and hardened inside me into cold determination. I was driving to my sister Keisha's apartment. She lived about an hour away in the city. Keisha was a social worker, strong and independent, and extremely wise about human nature. I had called her last night to warn her I was coming, so she was already expecting me. When I pulled up to her apartment building, she was waiting outside on the steps. Seeing me get out of my car looking exhausted and pulling a suitcase, Keisha didn't ask a bunch of questions. She walked over silently and wrapped me in a tight hug. At that warm gesture of sisterly love, I almost broke down and started sobbing, but I managed to hold it together. It wasn't time to show weakness yet. Keisha took me up to her apartment. It was a small, cozy place that smelled like the lavender candles she always burned. She made me sit on her comfortable couch and brought me a mug of hot tea. She told me to relax and tell her everything when I was ready. And so I did. I told her the whole story, from the message on the tablet to the trap I set inviting Tasha to our house, to the confrontation with Jerome and my decision to leave him. I spoke with surprising calmness, like I was describing something that happened to someone else. When I finished, Keisha hit her fist on her coffee table, making a loud bang. She let out a curse word and told me I had done exactly the right thing, that a cheating husband deserves no forgiveness, and that my way of handling the mistress was genius. Classy but absolutely devastating. Keisha started thinking about the situation from a practical angle. She looked at the evidence I'd collected, the credit card statements, the text messages, the photos. She nodded approvingly and said with all that I had more than enough to win big in divorce court. She said her friend Marcus was one of the best divorce lawyers in the state and she'd call him first thing Monday morning. But Keisha told me that before going to court we needed to teach that cheating pair a lesson they'd remember for the rest of their lives. Divorce would be my freedom, but real justice meant making the betrayer pay in other ways too. She proposed a revenge plan that was more strategic. Instead of posting about it on social media and becoming the subject of gossip, we would attack what mattered most to Jerome: his job and his professional reputation. Keisha explained that we should write a formal complaint to Jerome's company's human resources department. A calculated blow to his career and credibility would hurt 1,000 times more than a few angry confrontations. I nodded in complete agreement. Our eyes met, and I saw the same determination reflected back at me. That afternoon would be spent planning the final battle. The weekend passed in eerie silence. Jerome didn't stop calling and texting, but I ignored everything. I turned off my phone and spent all my time at Keisha's apartment preparing the perfect payback for my husband and his mistress. Keisha helped me write a professional, detailed complaint letter. Instead of angry insults or exaggerations, we used calm, objective language like we were writing an official legal document. The subject line of the email was short but powerful: formal complaint regarding inappropriate relationship and misuse of company resources. I scanned all my evidence. The text message screenshots showing the personal relationship, the credit card statements proving he used our joint money that included his work bonuses to buy gifts, receipts showing he left work early multiple times claiming illness but actually meeting Tasha. Keisha organized everything into one clean PDF file, clearly marking dates, times, and specific incidents. Monday morning arrived with gray skies that looked like they were predicting a storm. At exactly 9 o'clock, the time when office workers sit down at their desks and check email, I opened my laptop. Keisha sat next to me and put her hand on my shoulder as support. I took a long deep breath and reviewed the email draft one final time. The recipient list included Jerome's direct boss, the head of human resources, and the company's ethics officer. I didn't send it to the entire company. I didn't want to be petty or unprofessional. I only sent it to the people who had the authority to take action against Jerome and Tasha. My mouse cursor hovered over the send button. My heart pounded loudly, not from fear or doubt but from the intensity of this deciding moment. One single click would completely alter the lives of 3 people. Jerome would lose the career he'd spent a decade building. Tasha would lose her first real job and her future opportunities. And I would close the door on a painful chapter to begin writing a new story. I remembered Tasha's bold attitude when she showed up at my house expecting to see Jerome. I remembered Jerome's weakness as he knelt on our kitchen floor begging. I remembered those pancakes I threw in the garbage. The last tiny bit of sympathy left in my heart evaporated completely. Goodbye, ex-husband, I whispered to myself as I clicked firmly with my finger. Send. A short, simple notification popped up on my laptop screen. The email loaded with evidence that would end Jerome and Tasha's careers had been delivered. I leaned back in the chair and let out a huge sigh of relief. It was done. The arrow had been released and nobody could stop it now. All I had to do was wait for the storm to crash down on those traitors' heads. That Monday, the atmosphere at Jerome's company must have been as tense and uncomfortable as that Saturday morning when Tasha came to our house. According to a former coworker of Jerome's who I stayed friendly with, my email caused massive shock and spread through the office like wildfire within minutes. Jerome tried to act normal when he arrived at work that morning, but inside he must have been consumed by panic and dread. At 10:30, the head of HR called him into a private conference room. There they presented evidence that he had violated company policy by pursuing a personal relationship with a subordinate and had used work time for personal matters. It was a serious ethics violation, and he was immediately suspended without pay while they conducted a full investigation. Jerome stood there with his face drained of all color. He opened his mouth trying to make excuses, claiming it was lies and slander from a bitter spouse. But the HR director held up a hand, firmly cutting him off. On the conference table she placed a thick printed copy of that exact PDF file I had sent. Faced with such clear, undeniable evidence, Jerome went silent. 2 security officers appeared and politely but firmly asked him to collect his personal belongings and leave the building immediately. Everyone in the office was stunned watching the man who until that morning was a respected project manager getting escorted out like he'd committed a crime. Jerome walked in complete silence with his head hanging down while coworkers whispered and stared at him from their cubicles. That public humiliation would leave a permanent stain on his professional reputation. I heard about all this through my friend's text messages while sitting at Keisha's kitchen table. I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no revenge pleasure, no pity. It was simply the natural consequence of his choices. When he trampled on our marriage vows and chased his selfish desires, he signed the death certificate for his own career. 5 days later his termination became official. The reason listed in the company announcement was severe violation of workplace conduct policies and damage to company integrity. Jerome didn't just lose his job. His name went onto an unofficial blacklist that HR departments share. In our industry, word travels faster than lightning. Once your ethical reputation gets destroyed, especially by a scandal involving a junior employee, the doors to future opportunities slam shut almost permanently. The financial consequences hit Jerome like a tsunami wave. He lost his main income, but all the bills kept arriving right on schedule. The car payment, the mortgage, the credit cards, everything became a noose tightening around his neck. Before, thanks to his good salary and my careful budgeting, we lived comfortably without money stress. Now just the monthly interest on our debts was crushing him. My phone kept ringing and ringing. Jerome's number flashed on my screen over and over. Looking at the name I used to have saved as my love, I felt nothing but coldness. I changed his contact name to just Jerome and let every call go to voicemail. Then the text messages started flooding in. At first they were desperate pleas begging for forgiveness, asking me to withdraw my complaint and give him another chance to prove himself. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted to angry accusations, calling me vindictive and cruel for destroying his whole life over one mistake. I glanced at them briefly, then deleted every single one. Cruel. When he was texting another woman while I cooked dinner for our family, did he think about cruelty? When he spent our money buying gifts for his girlfriend while I carefully budgeted every dollar for our kids' future, did he consider my feelings? I had only demanded what was fair and just. Even his mother, who lived several states away, called me. My mother-in-law, crying hysterically, yelled at me, calling me a heartless woman who destroyed her son and grandchildren's lives. She said all men make mistakes sometimes, and a good wife overlooks it to preserve the family. Hearing that outdated toxic advice, I felt deep sadness for how some women are taught to accept mistreatment. I told my former mother-in-law calmly that I refused to live with a man who betrayed me and our children's trust. Then I ended the call. I blocked phone numbers from Jerome's entire extended family. I had no interest in hearing lectures about old-fashioned ideas of wifely duty. Jerome had lost everything. Literally everything. His wife, his family relationships, his career, his reputation. And now he was drowning in debt he couldn't pay. He wandered around that house we used to share together, facing empty rooms and overwhelming loneliness. It was the most appropriate punishment for someone who didn't appreciate what he had when he had it. Tasha's fate was equally harsh. As soon as Jerome got suspended, she was also called into the HR office. She walked in with red puffy eyes and a devastated expression, completely different from the confident flirty image she had that Saturday morning. The decision to terminate her position was immediate and final. The official reason given was violation of professional boundaries and creating a hostile work environment. Tasha cried and begged for a second chance. She said she was young and stupid and made a terrible error in judgment. But in the cold corporate world, those innocent-sounding excuses mean nothing. She was working for a major respected company. Getting fired for ethical violations meant the door to her professional future had been slammed halfway shut. Worse than losing her job was the contempt and judgment from everyone around her. The story of the bold mistress who challenged a man's wife became the hottest gossip topic in the company's private chat groups and breakroom conversations. When Tasha was packing her desk supplies into a cardboard box, nobody came over to help her or say goodbye. Everyone looked at her with disgust and whispered behind their hands as she walked past. The men who used to flirt with her in the break room now avoided her, completely afraid of being associated with a scandal. Tasha left the office building alone, carrying her pathetic box of belongings. The long, empty hallway must have felt like walking through fire. At the elevator, she ran into the same security guard who had watched her run away from my house in tears days before. The guard's look of pity was the final straw, and Tasha completely broke down, sobbing loudly right there. She ran out of the building, leaving behind the sound of people's cruel laughter and judgment. According to what Keisha heard through her network, after that incident, Tasha couldn't handle the shame and moved to a different part of the state. She deleted all her social media accounts and basically disappeared from public view. It was an extremely expensive lesson for a young woman just beginning her adult life. She tried to use her youth and looks to get something she hadn't earned. But in the end, she lost the most valuable thing a person has: her integrity and self-respect. I didn't feel sorry for Tasha one bit. She made her own choices, ignoring basic morality and common decency. The consequences were entirely her responsibility. I only hoped that after this painful failure she would learn to live with more honor and respect for others. 3 months later, Jerome and I met again in family court for our divorce settlement hearing. Jerome looked like he'd aged 20 years. He had an unkempt beard, wrinkled clothes that didn't fit right, and dark circles under his eyes. He looked at me with desperate, pleading eyes, but I kept my face cold and distant, showing no emotion. Keisha's lawyer friend Marcus sat beside me, representing my interests. His presence, professional and intimidating, made Jerome shrink even smaller in his chair. In the courtroom, Jerome tried one last time to say he still loved me and wanted to save our marriage. But Marcus immediately presented all the documented evidence of Jerome's infidelity and betrayal. That wiped out any weak hope he still clung to in one decisive move. Dividing our assets and debts was the most tense part of the hearing. Our house was our biggest shared asset. Jerome, out of pride and desperation, wanted to keep it. He didn't want to end up renting some tiny apartment. He proposed paying me my half share in small monthly payments over many years. I shook my head firmly and let out a laugh of pure contempt. I absolutely refused to stay financially connected to this man for years and years. Marcus, on my behalf, presented my non-negotiable conditions. Either Jerome paid me 50% of the house's current value in one lump sum plus the $5,000 my parents contributed, or we would sell the house immediately and split the proceeds. He would be solely responsible for any remaining mortgage debt. Jerome's face went white as a sheet. Unemployed and buried in debt, where was he supposed to get tens of thousands of dollars overnight? The bank had already sent him 2 foreclosure warning letters for missing mortgage payments. In the end, he had absolutely no choice but to agree to sell the house. The home that was once his pride and joy went on the market as a quick sale priced below market value. After paying off the remaining mortgage, giving me my 50% share and returning my parents' $5,000 loan. Jerome was left with barely enough money to rent a cheap studio apartment. He signed the divorce papers with a hand that shook so violently his signature was almost unreadable. That crooked scribble marked the official end of 8 years of marriage. He walked out of the courthouse that day with essentially nothing. No house, no car, he'd already sold it to pay some debts, no wife, no children, they chose to stay primarily with me, and no job. He stood alone in the sunny courthouse parking lot, watching in silence as I drove away in my car toward my new future. The price he paid was extremely high, but it was entirely his own fault and doing. I received my share of money from the house sale and asset division. It was a significant amount, enough to give me a solid fresh start. Instead of buying a big fancy place like before, I chose a modest, comfortable townhouse in a peaceful neighborhood with good schools for my kids. I decorated my new home exactly the way I wanted it. Gone was the expensive, flashy furniture meant to impress Jerome's coworkers and friends. In its place, I put soft, comfortable pieces in calming colors, lots of green plants, and a sturdy bookshelf made of real wood. Every corner of my new house reflected my own personality and radiated genuine peace. This evening I invited Keisha over for dinner to celebrate my new beginning. We're sitting on my small back patio with a cool breeze blowing, drinking iced tea, and watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Keisha raised her glass in a toast to my freedom, to escaping that toxic situation and starting fresh. I smiled genuinely for the first time in months and clinked my glass against hers. Without her strength, support, and wisdom, I probably wouldn't have survived this storm with my sanity intact. My phone buzzed with a notification. My bank app showed my paycheck deposit. I recently got a promotion at my job to senior manager after successfully leading a major project. Staying busy with work helped me gradually move past the pain of my destroyed marriage. I opened my email and saw a message from someone I didn't know. Her profile picture showed a sunflower in bright yellow bloom. She was writing to thank me. It turned out Keisha had shared my story anonymously on an online women's support forum to help others, changing all the names and identifying details for privacy. This woman explained that reading about my experience gave her the courage to finally leave her abusive, cheating husband after years of suffering in silence. Reading her heartfelt message, I felt unexpected warmth spread through my chest. My painful experience hadn't been completely meaningless and wasted. It had become inspiration and a roadmap for other women trapped in similar situations. I took a slow, deep breath, enjoying the fresh evening air. The painful past was now sealed shut behind those courthouse doors. Now stretching out before me was a wide, open sky full of possibilities and hope. My name is Jasmine. I'm 32 years old. I'm single, independent, strong, and genuinely happy. I smiled to myself and took a sip of cold tea. The slightly bitter taste of the tea, followed by the sweet, refreshing aftertaste, reminded me of life itself. Sometimes you have to go through the bitter, painful parts to truly appreciate the sweetness of freedom and peace. Did you enjoy this story? And where in the world are you listening from? Let's connect in the comments section. If this story touched your heart, you can support me by clicking the super thanks button so I can keep creating more powerful stories like this one. Thank you so much for your incredible support and encouragement. I'm really looking forward to reading your thoughts and comments about the story. On your screen you can see 2 more life stories that I think you'll really love. There's so much more content on my channel, JAMAL'S Stories. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story. See you in the next one. With love and respect.